Hey, I'm Sandra. Today we're looking at changing those old computer speakers into this guitar amp. I'm going to show you how I did it myself. We're going to start this one off by taking both of the speakers apart. You're going to want to remove any of the plastic casings and only keep the important parts, like the speakers of course, and any of the electronic pieces. Now the core of this project is pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is we're going to take the auxiliary cable and we're going to cut it off. And what we're going to do is we're going to replace it with a 1/4 inch mono input jack. Now if you really wanted to, you can end the project here and just keep the original casing for the speakers. But what's the fun in doing that? Now for my custom casing, I had this old box laying around that had fabric and all. I decided that I was going to use this for my amp. I roughly measured the size of the amp I want and cut the pieces using the table saw. Now where I plan to put the speakers, I did double up on the material. This would allow me to screw the speakers in. Using the original knobs and buttons for the speaker, I then drilled out the holes accordingly. I then routed out 2 holes where the speakers will go. From here I then began constructing the box the speakers would go in using glue and nails. Once I knew everything was dry, I then started rounding over the edges using a sander. I also used the sander to remove any of the glue and adhesive that was stuck on the material. From here I added a couple of spacers and dividers for the back piece, and also a spacer for the electronics. Using the box as a reference, I then measured and cut out the material needed for this project. It's also good to point out that a coffee mug works perfectly for cutting around. For the speaker grill, I cut out a piece from this old piece of metal. I mounted this onto the box using nails that were about 17 feet too long. Once everything was mounted, I then sprayed it with some black Tremclad. From here I glued all of the material on using some regular school glue. To clean up around the holes, I used some washers that I had laying around. It was then time to assemble everything. I glued and screwed everything in so nothing would rattle. Once everything was mounted inside of the amp, I then went back to gluing the fabric around the case. I drilled out a couple holes for the back and finished them off using some washers. I then fed through the power cable to get it ready for soldering. Once I knew everything was ready, I then began to solder everything back together. To close the case, I just used a simple pressure fit. And finally, to finish off the amp, I then added a handle for carrying purposes. This was a super easy build, and in fact it was made out of complete scraps, as you saw in the video. This acts as a perfect practice amp. I mean, you can throw it in your backpack and you can play with it anywhere as long as you have an outlet, of course. This is actually the second one I've made as well. I've made 2. This was the first one that I've done. It's a little bit heavier, made out of plywood. So I really enjoyed making this one, and if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. Alright, take it easy. Boop.